What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Week 5 edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 10-game slate today. It's our first week with bye weeks. We have a lot of injuries as well. Sets up as, I think, a pretty interesting slate. There's a lot of good plays, even though we have the bye weeks, because we do have a lot of injuries. But at the same time, there's a lot of, I think, similar pivots that you can make in tournaments, especially like looking at the quarterback position, thinking about stacks. There are some that are certainly going to be more popular than others, but no Lamar Jackson, he's out. Josh Allen's not on the slate. It's just a kind of weaker quarterback slate than usual. You don't have the typical guys to pay up for. Most expensive quarterback on the slate on DraftKings is Jaden Daniels, who's returning from injury, wearing a knee brace. Who knows how that affects him and his rushing upside. So I think that there are ways to be different with your stacks, with what you're playing, while still getting to the plays that we really want, guys that do project better because of injury, especially at the running back position, etc. There's obviously some good wide receiver plays as well. So I'm going to go through game by game as usual, talking about everything in those games. I'll take a look at my player exposures that I got using the Run the Sims tool or tools at the end of the show, going through position by position there. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in chat. But starting here with the Giants taking on the Saints, one of the teams that is dealing with a big injury is the Giants. They replaced Russell Wilson at quarterback last week with Jackson Dart. That went well. He is a more appealing DFS option generally than Russell Wilson because of the rushing upside that he gives you. But the big injury and the thing that could obviously hamper this offense going forward, Malik Neighbors tore his ACL. He's out for the year. So you do get one of these tricky spots that can be difficult in DFS, where on the one hand, obviously there are a massive amount of targets to go around when you remove Malik Neighbors from the Giants offense, but you run into efficiency concerns as well. Wan'Dale Robinson, the second most targeted wide receiver behind Neighbors, certainly if he can get open, has the potential to get more targets, but he's going to be a bigger focal point of opposing defenses now. Darius Slayton will take on more of the Neighbors downfield role. He's going to get more opportunities now. He's still cheap, but obviously he's not the same level of talent as Malik Neighbors. So you're still going to run into the issue of, maybe he gets air yards. Maybe Dart tries to get him the ball, but can he actually do it? The upside, though, is he is going to be cheap, at least until he proves that he can really produce consistently. So you do get upside here with the Giants. Nobody that I would consider a top priority as far as the pass catchers go, but no real ownership coming in either, as you can see here. These are the ownership projections that I'll be using or that I use. That's why they're great. It's grayed out. But you can upload whatever you want to use, or you can use the default ones on the site. But these are the ownership projections I used when I ran the Sims. And you're not really getting much ownership coming into the Giants pass catchers at all. So in large field tournaments, if you do want to take some shots at Wan'Dale Robinson, at Darius Slayton, those would be the first two wide receivers I looked at. Some interest in Theo Johnson as well at no ownership. I do think it's noteworthy that he was targeted at a higher rate by Jackson Dart than he had been by Russell Wilson. It's only one game, obviously, but that is something where there's a vacuum for targets for the Giants. Theo Johnson is an athletic pass catcher, and Russell Wilson just wasn't really targeting him for whatever reason. It could be that he's going to continue to not be targeted, but also just a different quarterback, not having Neighbors. Theo Johnson is someone that certainly a week or two from now we could be looking at a bit differently than we are right now when he's not getting any ownership at 3,400. So I think any of those three guys are fine. You do have a nice matchup against the Saints. They have been, a fast-paced team. They give up a lot of plays to the opponent. The only guy on this team that is getting ownership is Cam Scatterbo, and that is certainly warranted as well. 6K price tag, dominated work out of the backfield for them last week. I do expect that you get some involvement from Devin Singletary here, but I expect most of the carries to go to Scatterbo. I expect him to be involved as a pass catcher. Now, I do think he'll take a hit, at least somewhat, in terms of targets per route run with Jackson Dart at quarterback compared to Russell Wilson, because Dart will run and escape pressure that way much more often than Wilson, who will just dump it down to Scatterbo. Also, his numbers are a little bit inflated, or probably a lot inflated as well, because you had the Kansas City game where Kansas City was just completely selling out to remove Malik Nabers from the game entirely. That's the game where I don't think Nabers was even targeted until the second half and didn't catch a pass, I don't think, until late in the second half. So in that game, you just had Scadaboo running wide open on 3-4 yard routes. And that drives up his targets per route run as well. But we do know that he is still an involved pass catcher, and there are plenty of targets available. So you do expect a drop in efficiency overall for the Giants offense, but opportunities are still there. When you get a drop in efficiency, you're talking more about median projections than you are the ceiling projections, because an increase in opportunity is going to lead to a higher ceiling. It's just that the decrease in efficiency sort of balances out the median projection, but it doesn't lower what it looks like when things do go well and those additional passes are caught. So if you do need to find some pivots in tournaments, there are just better wide receiver plays in, for example, Wan'Dale Robinson's price range. You're going to get people going to Chris Olave at the same price or a similar price on the other side of this game. That's completely warranted. There's other wide receivers in that range. There's a lot of running backs that are cheap this week. So you can understand why there's not a ton of ownership coming into Robinson, but he's certainly live to beat those guys. So tournament team more so than anything here, with the exception of Scadaboo, who I do think looks like one of many good, relatively inexpensive running back plays on this slate. On the other side for the Saints, mentioned it a second ago, but the guy getting the most ownership here is Chris Olave at 5,200. He's been heavily involved as a target option this year, as you would completely expect on this Saints offense. One thing that has been the case for the offense overall is a lack of yards per reception. Olave generally more of the underneath guy than Shaheed in the past anyway, so maybe not quite as big a deal for him. But Shaheed, for example, last year averaged 17 yards per reception. This year, he's at 9.5. You're seeing a much lower ADOT for him. So you are kind of in this situation where, yes, Olave is going to be targeted frequently in full PPR. That is obviously really nice, but you are going to have to get him doing more after the catch, or catching it in the end zone, which is kind of asking a lot for a Saints offense that isn't very good at moving the ball, to really hit those ceiling games on a slate where you have 10 games, you have a lot of good plays. But Olave does project well. He's underpriced given the targets that he is getting. So he's the only guy really getting ownership here. You have 6% coming into Kamara. He's 5,900. There are a couple of problems here with Kamara. One has been season long, and that is that with Kellen Moore in New Orleans, new offensive coaching staff, they are not, or have not at least, been scheming out targets for Kamara, throwing him screens at nearly the same rate as he's always gotten in the past. So as a result, you're just not getting basically what I was just talking about with Chris Olave, where he's just getting these free PPR points because he's getting all these targets. Kamara's not getting the targets like he used to, where he just had this built-in floor of 6 fantasy points because he catches 6 screen passes. Not to say that will never happen in any given game, but it hasn't been the norm. And then on top of that, Josh just mentioned it in chat, Taysom Hill is back. So is Foster Moreau. Obviously, one of those things is more concerning for Kamara and the Saints in general than the other. Don't know how involved Hill will be in game one. Don't know how involved Hill will be overall. Again, we do have a new coaching staff as well, so remains to be seen exactly how they utilize him. But obviously, with him being active, that does increase the chances of the thing that you run into very often with Kamara, where the Saints actually do manage to get inside the 5, and then suddenly the ball's going to Taysom Hill. Clearly better chance of that happening today than there has been so far this year since he hasn't played. And then you've also seen Kendra Miller involved, behind Kamara as well. So just, he's 5,900. He obviously can still get there, but not any sort of a priority for me for all of the reasons that I mentioned. Nothing else that really stands out. Again, Shaheed's really cheap at 4,500. This would be pretty interesting last season if he were still getting targeted down the field, and you could just say, all right, well, he's 4,500 and maybe he'll catch a 60-yard touchdown. Kind of the same thing as with Kamara. I'm not saying you're never going to get a long touchdown to Shaheed this year. I'm sure it'll happen. But he's not being utilized the same way. And so now you're kind of looking at him as, oh, okay, this guy is the number 2 wide receiver on a really shitty offense, more so than he's the number 2 wide receiver on a really shitty offense, but he just gets 3 or 4 60-yard targets per game. That's not really happening anymore. So that lowers the interest in him a bit. Also, one thing to point out here as well, Juwan Johnson is banged up, and then you also have Hill and Morrow back. So this is the lowest route participation that we've projected Juwan Johnson for so far this season. We have seen him peppered with targets by Spencer Rattler, and that has made him an appealing play. But I expect him to run fewer routes, assuming he even plays this week, just because you do have those other tight ends back and because he is banged up. Next, we have Houston at Baltimore, which I think is one of the more interesting tournament games on the slate. There's just a really wide range of outcomes that this game can go. It certainly can completely go to shit. The Ravens obviously are playing without Lamar Jackson. They have Cooper Rush at quarterback. He's been okay. He's been serviceable as a backup in the past with Dallas, but obviously a very big drop off in terms of what you're expecting the offense to do when you have Cooper Rush instead of Lamar Jackson. And then on the other side is where I think it really gets interesting. You have this Houston offense that has not been good for a year and 4 weeks now, but they still have talent. You know, CJ Stroud, probably not as good as he was his rookie year, I guess, but still not a terrible quarterback. You have Nico Collins. Woody Marks has looked good. He, played a big role last week and is expected to continue playing a big role going forward. You have Christian Kirk back from injury. Like, this is an offense that does at least still have talented pieces. They have no offensive line to speak of, but this Ravens team does get Kyle Van Noy back, who is a good pass rusher, but they're without Matabuke for the rest of the season. He's one of their best pass rushers. Roquan Smith is out today. And then in the secondary, you're missing 2 of their top corners, and Kyle Hamilton, the biggest piece of their defense, is questionable with a groin injury. Haven't seen an update on his status. They did not elevate any defensive backs from the practice squad, so seems like something favorable news for him. But either way, they are shorthanded in the secondary. They don't have Roquan Smith. They're missing Matabuke for the entire season. We've seen teams run very heavily against the Ravens so far this year because they've been unable to stop it. And that certainly could be the case again today, where maybe the Texans just stay on the ground and feed Marks and feed Chubb and then feed Marks again because Chubb doesn't do anything. But there's nothing stopping them from throwing the ball here either against a just bad overall Ravens defense with a depleted secondary. So, again, yes, this could just turn into, holy shit, the Texans offensive line is terrible. The Ravens are getting to Stroud quickly. They still can't get anything done offensively, but it could just as easily be, oh my God, this Ravens defense is just unbelievably bad. They're giving up a lot of plays. That's something else that stands out. Like, Houston has a good chance to be on the field for more plays than usual. So I do find them interesting in tournaments where CJ Stroud is only $5,200, getting like 3% ownership. You do have some ownership coming into $6,800 Nico Collins, but none coming into a $4,300 Christian Kirk, none really coming into $5,400 Woody Marks, who I do think is somewhat difficult to get to just because you do have all these other running back plays on the slate. He's somebody that's difficult to prioritize and say like, oh, I'm going to play 20% Woody Marks or something like that. But in individual lineups where maybe you do have some popular wide receivers, you do have a popular stack or something like that, going to like Woody Marks over, Rico Dowdle or over Rashad White, not that he projects better, but range of outcomes wise, certainly in that same ballpark, especially if the Texans do continue to feed him like they said they want to after last week. So I do think the Texans are just a really interesting offense here. Wide range of outcomes, but generally, as long as you're getting limited ownership, a wide range of outcomes is an appealing thing to target in tournaments. It's not an appealing thing to target in cash games, but talking tournaments here, I do find the Texans pretty interesting. Getting to the Baltimore side, saw it mentioned in chat by Einsteinium. He said, can you convince me that Henry is a bad play today? No, I cannot. I think he's kind of similar to what I was just saying about Houston for different reasons. But the bear case, like the negative case for Derrick Henry, is very obvious. The Ravens are playing without Lamar Jackson. You don't have Lamar Jackson creating space for you to run through. The offense as a whole is very likely to be less efficient. The opposing defense can key in on Derrick Henry now. If Cooper Rush B2, Cooper Rush B2, I'm sure that the defensive focus all week has been, we're not getting beat by Derrick Henry when they don't have a quarterback that really threatens us. So you have all of those efficiency concerns. Kind of the same thing talking about with the Giants too, but it's still Derrick Henry. And if the Ravens are able to get into the red zone and around the goal line, there's even more touchdown equity for Derrick Henry when you have Cooper Rush instead of Lamar Jackson. So, like, the Ravens are probably going to lean on him as much as they can if they can have any success with him. So you do have efficiency concerns, but the upside's also massive. And again, there's just not ownership here because you have cheaper running backs that people are going to go to, and because the Ravens aren't nearly as appealing as they are when they have Lamar. But in terms of the upside for Derrick Henry at low ownership, I do think he's pretty interesting. I think he's one of the more under-owned guys in terms of like optimal rate versus ownership. Again, not saying he's somebody that you necessarily should be playing 20-25% of the time, but you don't need to. He's just somebody where if you have a popular team, like obviously people are going to go to Achane in this price range, and they should. They're going to go to Jonathan Taylor, and they should. But Derrick Henry's just kind of going to be sitting there because he's not one of those guys. He's not Jahmyr Gibbs. He's just kind of going to be sitting there, and nobody's going to want him. And it's still Derrick Henry. And you can make the case, if this offense is able to function, he's going to be carrying it even more so than usual because of there being no Lamar Jackson. Beyond that, Zay Flowers, 6,200. There's a million wide receivers I like. If the Ravens are able to get the passing game going, it's very likely that it is through Zay Flowers, but there's just, other bigger priorities here. Derrick Henry is the guy that I would expect I have the most of from the Ravens offense if I'm getting to them at all. Dallas taking on the Jets in New Jersey. No CeeDee Lamb, so you do still have an expectation of reduced efficiency for this Dallas offense, although we did not see it at all because they just shredded Green Bay once they got out of like the first quarter. But you do still expect some sort of drop off. Also, no Turpin this week, so that certainly doesn't help either. But it is still a relatively talented offense. Like Dak Prescott, obviously a talented quarterback. George Pickens is a good wide receiver. You saw that on whatever night, Sunday night, Thursday night, whatever night they played Green Bay. So like there is still upside here. We do have a Q tag on Miles Sanders. Have him projected out right now. That's just kind of reading between the lines. He didn't practice on Friday. They've said Jadon Blue is going to be active this week. So I'm guessing Sanders is out. If he's in, I don't think it really matters too much. You probably take a little bit of the rushing workload away from Javonte Williams in that case. But Javonte Williams and George Pickens likely to be the two highest owned guys here, along with Jake Ferguson. You get this offense that, they might drop off a little bit in efficiency, but you do still have the good quarterback. And now you should get a pretty concentrated share of targets on a pass-heavy team to Pickens, Williams, and Jake Ferguson. Ferguson at 4,800 looks like one of the best tight end options. And that's a position where obviously there's not going to be that many good options because it's tight end and it sucks. Javonte Williams is one of the more popular mid-range running back options. There are plenty of pivots there, but again, he's relatively involved as a pass catcher. He has touchdown equity around the goal line. We've seen him be the clear workhorse for this offense. So that does keep him pretty appealing at 6,200. And then there's a million good wide receiver plays today, but George Pickens certainly is one of them. On the other side, Justin Fields will almost definitely be the most popular quarterback on the slate at 5,600. I think that he's your cash game quarterback. He gives you rushing upside, obviously. And you saw it on Monday night against Miami. It doesn't take that much for him to just have a monster game. Like he could just go out there and play well. But he put up like 28 fantasy points basically on two good plays against Miami. And it's because he broke like a 60-yard touchdown run, and then he threw a jump ball to Garrett Wilson that Garrett Wilson made one of the best catches you'll see all season. And suddenly Justin Fields is really good, even though he played like shit for the entire night. He's just too cheap for his median projection. He's too cheap for his upside. And then on top of that, you have a concentrated target tree as well. You don't really run the risk of, I played Justin Fields, but I played him with the wrong guys, because if Justin Fields gets it done through the air, the only people that he's looking at are Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, and Mason Taylor. And nobody else exists in Justin Fields' frame of vision. So it's pretty unlikely that you stack him up and get it wrong. You can also just play naked Justin Fields, play Fields by himself, and then mix in some mini game stacks elsewhere, like two wide receivers from a couple different games, maybe running back, wide receiver from one game, wide receiver from the other side of the same game, do stuff like that. So you still have correlation in your lineup. It's just not with your quarterback. And with Fields, it doesn't matter that much. And in some ways, it can even be beneficial because such a high percentage of lineups are going to be Justin Fields plus Garrett Wilson, or Justin Fields plus Breece Hall, or both of them. But this is going to be a very popular team. It's a good matchup against Dallas. The prices are too cheap. Also, no Braylon Allen should be a benefit for Breece Hall. Isaiah Davis should be the RB2 here. I expect him to be involved on passing downs. He already was. And I expect him to get some additional rushing work compared to what he was getting. But I do think he's less of a threat to really eat into Breece Hall's workload than Braylon Allen was, especially around the goal line. So I do think it's a bump here for Breece Hall, who's only 5,600. Again, 6,100 for a very talented Garrett Wilson, who has like a 35% target share so far this season, because Justin Fields' idea of playing quarterback is take the snap, stare at the first guy. If he's open, throw it to him. If he's not open, run. And the first guy is almost always Garrett Wilson. So he gets the vast majority of the targets. Mason Taylor, we saw last week, finally him start getting targets. The Jets had talked about wanting to get him the ball more. He had been wholly uninvolved through the first 3 weeks. He's still, I think, going to be pretty hit or miss, because for the same reasons I was just saying, like Justin Fields isn't somebody that's standing in the pocket looking for his second, third option. But at the same time, other than Hall and Wilson, Taylor should be like the first option more often than anybody else. So at 2,800 in full PPR, I do think he looks okay. But I would certainly put him behind Hall and Wilson in the pass catcher hierarchy here for the Jets. I really don't think there's much of a case for anybody else. Like Josh Reynolds is out there running a bunch of routes, and he's only 3,500 and unowned, but there's enough value on this slate that I don't think you need to hope that Josh Reynolds catches his 2 targets or anything like that. Fourth game on the slate, Vegas taking on the Colts in another interesting one. We are waiting on injury confirmation news here. It was reported last night that Brock Bowers was trending toward not playing today. Schefter reported this morning that Brock Bowers injured his knee week 1. Doctors have told him the injury will not get better if he doesn't stop playing. He has refused to stop playing. It's unclear from what Schefter said if he is just filling us in on what's happened the last few weeks, or if he's suggesting that Bowers is once again going to play through it. I don't know, but it is a 1:00 game. Have him projected out right now. That does increase target opportunities for Jacoby Myers, increases target share for Trey Tucker, probably get a little bit more opportunities for Ashton Genty. But again, that does potentially come with a similar efficiency hit, like we were talking about without CeeDee Lamb, without Malik Neighbors, because I certainly don't expect the Colts to be as concerned about Ian Thomas and Albert O as they are about Brock Bowers. So they can pay plenty of attention to Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Myers is going to be very, very popular. And this is just another one of those plays. There's a lot of these on this slate. And it's why at the top I was saying I think it's an interesting tournament slate. It's not that any individual player is like a good or bad play. You know, that's something that I've talked about in the past. It's all about the lineups you're playing a lot more so than the individual players. But what tends to happen is that you get players at each price range in each position that project like 1 or 2 points better than everybody around them. And especially with Sims now too, as a result, they just get jammed into so many lineups when on a 1-game slate, somebody that projects for a wide receiver that projects for, 16 fantasy points and a wide receiver that projects for 13.5 fantasy points are not that different in terms of their range of outcomes. Like, you're always choosing the one that projects for 16 or 17 in cash games without a doubt. But in tournaments, the ownership gap, as long as there is, a decent ownership gap there, you can pick the one that has a 13.5 point projection because there is just so much volatility. So Myers is certainly one of those guys. I think Olave to some extent, although I don't think he'll get the same level of ownership as Myers. Certainly somebody that, like, he looks really good at 5,600. He's almost definitely going to get targeted a lot. Also, the Raiders offensive line is absolutely decimated. They are Geno Smith probably not going to have a lot of time. The downside there is, obviously he could just be under so much pressure he can't get the ball to Myers. The positive is Myers is a relatively low ADOT guy who, if Geno just needs to get the ball out of his hands, you could certainly see Myers just, working short routes over the middle of the field, especially, again, if Bowers is out. The offensive line issues, more of a concern for somebody like Tucker, somebody like Thornton that are running more of their routes deeper down the field. Not to say that they can't make a big play, but it does, hurt the chances of that. Myers, you kind of can make the argument either direction. Like, it could just be a complete shit show for the Raiders, or it could just be Myers getting spammed with 7-yard target after 7-yard target. So he is certainly underpriced, but there are a lot of ways you can go at wide receiver today. So just, keep that in mind. Again, if you're looking at a lineup that you have popular players and you need somebody in his price range, there are other guys you can find. If you went to, like, I don't know, the Jackson Dart, Wan'Dale Robinson stack, then by all means play Jakobi Meyers at that point, because he is clearly one of the best plays in his price range. If Bowers is in, he's only 5,500, but is obviously playing hurt. He has said it's affecting his ability to separate. It would be a risky play, but it is still $5,500 Brock Bowers. Ashton Genty, $6,700 price tag, getting about 8% ownership. He's a really tricky one. I thought he was going to be more popular this week because of last week, but right now not getting much ownership just because of the landscape of the running back position, where you have all these cheap guys that you can pay down for that are really good point per dollar plays. And then it's easy to get to the guys that are a little bit more expensive than Genty and just project better. Your Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, Achane range. So it is kind of leaving Genty probably in like around 10%. Maybe he gets a little bit of extra ownership just because of last week. I think he's really interesting to talk about because going into last week, I had tweeted it, and then it just kind of ended up being really popular anyway. Everybody was down on him because he wasn't doing anything, but his workload had still been absolutely massive. Like, the Raiders were not giving touches in competitive games to really anybody else. Then last week, you have him maintain a similar workload and just run extremely good on touchdowns. Like, he hasn't been targeted very heavily this year. He gets 2 receiving touchdowns last week. He caught 2 passes. I think he was targeted 3 times, caught 2 passes, 2 touchdowns. It's not like you saw some Ashton Genty breakout in the receiving game. They just threw it to him twice at like the 5-yard line. So that doesn't really change anything about how you project him going forward. And he had the rushing touchdown as well. You still need the Raiders to get into the red zone, and they haven't been very good at that so far this year. You still need them to block and open up holes for him, which they haven't been very good at this year. And again, their line got even worse with another injury. So it's the same play as last week in terms of he's probably going to be a low efficiency guy more often than not because of his environment, if nothing else, his offensive line, but he's going to get all the opportunities. He's not super expensive. He's not super popular. So Myers clearly the priority here, but you can go to Genty as well. You have to look back 1 week to see what it looks like when it goes well, even though clearly that's not going to be the norm. Geno Smith getting 4% ownership, 5,400. Mildly interesting. I always think it's a kind of cool like tournament strategy when you have the really popular guy like Jakobi Meyers. One way you can be kind of different is to, instead of using him as like a one-off in some other stack, pair him with Geno. Jakobi Meyers catches 2 touchdowns. Geno gets there at 5,400. But the thing with somebody like Myers is that, especially on DraftKings specifically, full PPR, Jakobi Meyers at 5,600 can have a very good game without actually bringing Geno along. Like, if Geno throws 7 passes to Jakobi Meyers for 85 yards and a touchdown, Jakobi Meyers at 5,600 looks really good. Geno has, that we know of, 70-something yards or 80 yards and a touchdown, which, obviously you need a lot more. So I do prefer it when you're talking about popular wide receivers that are more touchdown dependent to get there than Jakobi Meyers. But it is an interesting thought here where you can make your Jakobi Meyers teams a little bit more contrarian while still being, still maintaining correlation by going to Geno. So that's something to consider. On the other side here, a couple of very, very popular plays. Going to be a popular Indianapolis offense overall in a pretty good spot here against the Raiders. So far this season, quarterbacks against the Raiders actually not really producing. Running backs also not producing. I actually thought it was a better spot than it is. Wide receivers, I knew there was something. Wide receivers have been productive here. But you also just have some of the most talented players at their respective positions. Jonathan Taylor, $8,000 price tag, getting 31% ownership, give or take. I tweeted earlier this week that Jonathan Taylor has kind of turned into Christian McCaffrey, and it doesn't seem like anybody's talking about it. I didn't mean in terms of like his fantasy production year to date, because he has been up and down, but in two of their 4 games this year, the Colts have been in a massive blowout, and Jonathan Taylor has just given up touches late in the game to whoever happened to be behind him that day. In competitive games, or when the game is competitive, nobody is getting carries other than Jonathan Taylor. That's not new. That's been the case for years. But Daniel Jones being the quarterback is good for Jonathan Taylor. That's been talked about a lot. It was talked about, leading into the season. Obviously, not having Anthony Richardson increases touchdown equity around the goal line for Jonathan Taylor. It also increases the number of dump-off passes. But also, in addition to having a quarterback that will dump it off a little bit more, Jonathan Taylor is running a lot of routes now. That is a change from years past. He's somebody that would come off the field in third down situations. He's somebody that wasn't really used heavily as a pass catcher. And that always made him a really risky option, especially in full PPR, because he'd always be really expensive because he's getting tons of rushing yards. He's scoring a lot of rushing touchdowns, but you didn't have that receiving floor that you would get from players around him. So far this year, 73, 71, 81, and 77% route participation. And again, 2 of those games were blowouts. So he's really just running routes like every time that Daniel Jones drops back, or, close to it. And you're adding that floor in addition to, ceiling to go with getting all of the carries. So Jonathan Taylor looks great. Shouldn't be that difficult to find the salary there. Michael Pittman at 5,100, another of these mid-range receivers that's going to get a lot of ownership. Once again, no Alec Pierce. So Alec Pierce, not a high volume, target earner, but he is an outside receiver. Him being out helps solidify that Michael Pittman will be on the field for 90 to 100% of dropbacks here for Daniel Jones. There are, he is the number 1 receiver, wide receiver, not pass catcher necessarily because you have Tyler Warren, but he is the number 1 wide receiver on this team. He's only 5,100. Josh Downs, 4,100. I think he is a very interesting tournament play here. Like, I think Pittman is good. Everybody knows he's good at 5,100. He's underpriced. Josh Downs is the one that I like either to differentiate in tournaments individually or to mix into a Daniel Jones stack. So Josh Downs should benefit somewhat from Alec Pierce being out anyway. We saw him run around 70 to 75% routes on about 70% of dropbacks last week. His high prior to last week was about 60%. Most of Josh Downs' routes come in the slot, so he's not directly taking Alec Pierce's routes. And last week he ran almost exclusively from the slot, but it does still open up more routes in general because for example, last week, A.D. Mitchell ran like 90% of routes almost exclusively outside, whereas when Alec Pierce is there, you have Pittman and Pierce running almost all of their routes outside. You have Downs as the primary slot guy, but then you have Mitchell rotating in the slot. You have Doolin rotating in a little bit in the slot. Now, it's Mitchell running outside, it's Doolin running outside, and Downs is just getting pretty much all of the slot work other than Tyler Warren getting a bunch as well. But, they're running at the same time sometimes also. But then we also have the huge question mark here of how much is A.D. Mitchell playing today after all the dumb shit he did last week. The report overnight was that he is going to be active, but limited. And that can mean like anything. It could mean that Ashton Doolin is starting the game, as in literally going to play the first play, and then A.D. Mitchell is going to come in and have some huge bounce back game. It could mean that Doolin's going to run 80% of routes and Mitchell's barely going to be on the field. It could mean that the coaches are just lying their asses off and nothing's going to change. It could be something in the middle where, he does play fewer routes, or he runs fewer routes, but he's targeted at a higher rate. There's a lot of different ways it can go, but one thing that can happen if Mitchell's routes are actually significantly limited here, at that point, they either have to play Ashton Doolin a lot or start giving Josh Downs some routes on the outside. And we did see a couple of games last season where Pierce was either injured or limited, where Downs did get to like 80, 85% route participation. Josh Downs is somebody that earns targets when he's on the field. He's only 4,100. I think he's really going overlooked in an offense that everybody wants to get to, but he just seems like he's being ignored. And again, it's not that like you shouldn't be playing Taylor and Warren and Pittman, but I think you also should be playing Josh Downs. So I like him, whether it's just as a contrarian one-off or if it's in stacks. Doesn't really matter. I think Josh Downs looks good here. In your large field Millie Maker type stuff, if you want to try and guess right on 3K Ashton Doolin or $3,600 AD Mitchell, be my guest, but seems pretty far off the board given how many good plays there are today. Tyler Warren probably going to be the most popular tight end, especially if Brock Bowers sits. That's even more ownership that will just get funneled to Tyler Warren. He's going to be insanely popular. He should be. Ran about 55% of his routes from the slot last week without Alec Pierce. He has been targeted. He's earning like 0.26 targets per route run so far in his rookie season. We've seen him used around the goal line, had the rushing touchdown either last week or the week before. I don't remember which one now. I think it was last week. So just clearly very, very good. That's an absurd amount of ownership in terms of like ownership versus optimal rate. We have him right now in the sim I ran before the show. Warren was optimal 19 to 20% of the time. So going over owned for sure, but also your most likely tight end to be in the optimal lineup. So he looks good. You just need to make sure that you've handled ownership elsewhere in your lineup. And now I forget inputs. Okay. So yeah, just a game that should be really popular indoors as well. So that's good. High total. Really like this game a lot. I think that there are some ways you can be different along with playing the really obvious guys. My favorite one being Josh Downs at basically no ownership right now. Miami taking on Carolina, another game that's going to have ownership to a couple of specific players. Achane, $7,300, 34% ownership. No Tyreek Hill. He's out for the year. So for what feels like the fifth time, you get an offense where this was already a concentrated offense with Achane, Hill, and Waddle. And then now you have Waller just stealing touchdowns from people. But now it's going to be even more concentrated because you don't have Tyreek Hill. You do potentially get an efficiency drop-off here, but there's just more targets available now for Waddle, for Achane. This is a team that does look to throw the ball. And in Achane's case, generally, using him basically as an extension of the running game as well, you're just getting an extra point every time in your DFS lineup because they toss him the ball, throw him the ball a yard away instead of handing it to him. So he looks really, really good here. I believe he's the highest owned guy that I have right now in the set of lineups that I ran before the show. On the one hand, would I feel kind of good if I had less of him and, was just kind of making some like cool tournament plays at running back? Like, yeah, but $7,300 Achane, I'm not going to be upset about either. Carolina has been good at limiting production in the passing game to running backs so far this year. If you are looking for a reason to not get to Achane, they have allowed the second fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points to opposing running backs. Only the Jets have allowed fewer. That is using the fantasy points data. So if again, if you're looking for a reason, like you're not getting Achane, you don't want Achane, and you want to make yourself like feel more confident in it, there's a stat for you. But all things considered, still looks good here at 7,300. Jalen Waddle, 5,400, getting about 17% ownership. Like him quite a bit. We only have one game where he's played without Tyreek Hill. It was like a week 17 or week 18 game either last year, I think the year before, 2023. He went absolutely nuts, like 169 yards or something. Obviously, it's one game. You shouldn't be expecting anything close to that here, but he is going to get all the volume he can get. Like if he can get open, they're throwing him the ball. They're throwing Achane the ball. So clearly high upside for him. Waller, 3,500. Probably, I assume, runs a little bit more routes this week than he did last week in his first game back. I assume he's still going to be, somewhat limited here. He was targeted when he was on the field. He had those 2 touchdowns. He's 3,500, not getting much ownership. If you want a cheap tight end that's low owned, that's never a bad position to, roll the dice on low owned guys because it is generally such a random position. And it's kind of, if like Tyler Warren, Trey McBride, those guys are wide receivers. And so they're on their own little island, but it's an island made up of like 2 or 3 guys. And so if those 2 or 3 guys happen to not have a good game, then you get into just random dart throw, who caught a touchdown, what cheap guy caught a touchdown, and no ownership here because they're the optimal tight end. So that's kind of the thought process with Waller. It's the thought process with Theo Johnson. It's the thought process with basically any tight end not named Ferguson, McBride, or Warren this week. completely blanked there. So that would, be the case for Waller. But clearly, I think the priorities here are Achane and Jalen Waddle. On the Panther side, some interest there as well. Einstein just asked about it in chat. Rico Dowdle is the most appealing one. He is $4,300. He is getting about 25% ownership. Clearly one of the best point per dollar plays. He is somebody that I would fully expect you're getting to in cash games. I know he's in every optimal lineup that I looked at just because he is so cheap. There is fragility in the projection here in that we don't know exactly how this backfield is going to break down. My best guess at it, and it's in line with the industry, it's in line with the prop market, is that you don't see Rico Dowdle become like the true bell cow like a Jordan Mason, but that he is the clear one. Like, I think you'll see a little bit, a similar, maybe a little bit bigger split between Dowdle and ETN than you were between Hubbard and Dowdle. Dowdle, obviously, the veteran, much more established in the league than ETN. Any hesitation that the Panthers had in terms of ETN's ability to do anything doesn't evaporate just because Chuba Hubbard gets hurt. Obviously he'll be forced into more work, but I do expect that Dowdle is the clear one here. Now, he still has to score a lot of fantasy points, especially in large field tournaments. It's, again, just because somebody's 4,300, if you get 12 fantasy points at your running back spot, you are fighting an uphill battle because you still used a roster spot on 12 fantasy points or 13 fantasy points, even if he's cheap. So, that's the downside there, but it does give you the ability to get to really a lot of other things in your lineup that look really good. As far as optimal rates here on Dowdle, coming in optimal about 12% of the time. So again, there's just a lot of good running back plays. You're going to see, pretty flat optimal rates and then really concentrated ownership. So he is one of those guys that if you're just looking for one individual player to pivot off of, he is almost definitely going over owned relative to his chances of being in the optimal lineup. But he's also one of the, for lack of a better phrase, safer, best point per dollar plays on the slate. Beyond him, you do get McMillan, 5,700, the clear number one receiver here for the Panthers. It's not a good Dolphins defense either. So there is appeal in getting to Carolina. So far, Miami has actually been solid against opposing receivers. I don't know if that will continue or not. They've been hurt by opposing running backs. Opposing quarterbacks have done well. Opposing tight ends have done well. Opposing wide receivers have actually not. But McMillan is good. He's targeted frequently. He's $5,700. You get some correlation with the popular pieces on the other side with Achane and Waddle. So I do think McMillan looks solid. He's not getting quite as much ownership as some of the other wide receivers around him. No problems with McMillan. I think Dowdle is the guy I'll probably end up with the most of from Carolina. Bryce Young is really cheap at 4,700 if you wanted to pay all the way down at quarterback. Pair him with McMillan, throw in Achane, Waddle on the other side. You get a little game stack there. Certainly viable, but not any level of a priority for me. Denver taking on Philly. This one I think has like the least appealing stuff to talk about, but I think I'm also getting to it, which I guess shouldn't be surprising given that I think I've gotten to Philly's passing game on every show so far this season. On the Denver side, tough spot going into Philly. There's no ownership really coming into anybody. Bo Nix, 5,700 with rushing upside. The ceiling is there, but the ceiling is there applies to like 80% of starters on a DFS slate. But he does at least give you rushing upside. Cortland Sutton's really good, gets a lot of targets. Nix plus Sutton at no ownership is always going to be somewhat intriguing. But overall, I think Denver's one of the least appealing teams on the slate. On the other side, for the Eagles, I do think they are a pretty interesting tournament team because they just have so much talent offensively, and they're not going to get that much ownership because from a median projection standpoint, none of them look that good because you have you have really good point per dollar plays at running back. And then Saquon Barkley isn't going to project quite as well at the top end as Gibbs and Achane and Taylor. So you have Saquon kind of in that like Derrick Henry spot, probably going to be a little bit more popular than Henry, but still where it's just like, I have to actively sacrifice fantasy points to click on Saquon Barkley. That's hard for people to do. So you get him at relatively low ownership. AJ Brown at 6K, like for his ceiling, for his talent level, that's a cheap price tag. For his role in the average Philadelphia game, where they don't really look to throw the ball, that's pretty expensive. But when things go well, he destroys that salary. When things go normal, he's a shitty play at that salary. Whenever you get plays like that, they are the types of guys that, as long as they're not getting ownership, I like to look at in tournaments, because you're not winning a tournament with really any player on the slate if they have a normal game. To win, particularly talking large field tournaments, like to win large field tournaments, you pretty much need at least 8, normally 9 guys to have above average games. So I don't really care that much that it affects your cash rate more than it affects your winning, that the average game from A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith or Saquon Barkley or Jalen Hurts, for that matter, is not really that good at their price relative to the slate. When Jalen Hurts has a big game, 3 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns, I don't care that he's 6,800. I wouldn't care that he was 7,800 because you just need him in your lineup. Same kind of thing with A.J. Brown, with Devontae Smith. Like, those guys have that kind of ceiling. So I do think that, again, just getting to the passing game here, hoping that they throw it a little bit more than they have to date. They're always going to be a run-heavy offense, but they're probably not going to maintain the same level of run heaviness that we've seen so far this year. You do have the squeaky wheel narrative as well. You have A.J. Brown just kind of more vocally bitching every week that he's not getting the ball enough. And eventually you probably just satisfy some of the best players on your offense. It's not like the Eagles can't win games by using A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. So whenever those games happen, they're just tournament winning games for the Eagles. We've already seen it once this year. I'm always going to be interested in getting there when you have this entire offense like 10% owned or less, but it's not like a super appealing matchup or anything like that. Tennessee taking on Arizona. Tyjae Spears is back for Tennessee. I am happy to see that because it means I can stop clicking Tony Pollard every week. I still expect Tony Pollard to clearly be the lead back here, and he is only 5,400, but I don't expect him to get literally every carry out of the backfield and run, every running back route like he has been so far this year. I do expect, Spears to be out there and then probably to have a bigger workload as the weeks go on. There's not really much at all from Tennessee. Ridley's banged up, but he's expected to play. We saw his routes drop off last week as a result of the injury, so he is projected to be out there a little bit less than he has been. He's also just been completely useless this year. Io Manor, 4,100, sure, but I'd rather just play $4,100 Josh Downs at 2% owned because he's not on the Titans. Cam Ward has been dog shit this year. He can't complete passes. He's 4,600. The strongest only case I could make for Tennessee, other than they're literally 0% owned, is they're also free. But I don't think you really need that on this slate. You're not starved for value at all on this slate. But you could, if you wanted, Cam Ward plus Io Manor plus Ridley, and then you fade the cheap running backs, and it's just, if all those cheap guys do have that game where they score 10, 11, 12 points, instead you have Jonathan Taylor, you have Gibbs, you have Achane, you have, whatever wide receivers you want. That, I guess, is the argument. But yeah. On the other side, Arizona going to get some ownership here. Kyler probably going to be somewhere in the 2 through 5 range in terms of quarterback ownership. I think it's Justin Fields, clearly 1. And then it's Kyler, Jones, and Herbert in some order, 2 through 4. 5,900 looks good. Tennessee sucks. Matchup's nice. Doesn't have running backs, so maybe they throw a bit more. You don't have Trey Benson now, in addition to not having James Conner. The backfield here is going to be messy. 4K Michael Carter, I expect to be the lead back on early downs. I do expect that you see Demercado get some additional carries compared to what he normally gets. Bam Knight probably somewhat involved as well. It is really messy. There is a lot of volatility there where maybe Michael Carter really just gets more than expected, or maybe Bam Knight's actually ahead of Michael Carter, which doesn't seem likely, but who knows? But it's probably a pretty ugly mix. I expect Demercado to be, at the very least, the third down back, the guy catching the most passes out of the backfield. So mostly I'm not super interested in it. Either of Carter or Demercado, I guess, are playable. When you look at the ownership here and you don't have any coming into Demercado, you could, I guess, if you wanted to, make the case well, what if Demercado is actually just the lead guy? And not only is he the third down guy and hurry up guy, but he's also getting a bigger split of early carries than expected. at no ownership, that would be kind of interesting. Again, that's not what I'm expecting, but like you could make that case. If you're using Run the Sims, again, the thing that I really like is you don't have to like just change his projection number and hope you didn't screw anything up. You can literally say, instead of getting 22% of the carries, I think he's going to get 40, and you give him 40, you cut Carter to, whatever. So it equals 100. If you don't want to do the math, you just click the normalize button. And then when you run the Sims, it will give you your custom projection where DeMercado received 45% of the Cardinals carries and how how that impacts him for fantasy. So spots like that are volatile, the Colts spot with Mitchell. If you want to say, no, I think Mitchell still runs 80, runs all the routes, just change his target share. Somebody asked about it in chat earlier too. The best way to change the projections, just change his target share. And now you get your own projections and simulated results where AD Mitchell is not being punished or where DeMercado is the lead back, whatever it may be. The passing game here should get some ownership, about 7% coming to $5,400 Marvin Harrison. I think he's an interesting pivot to like the Olave ownership, the Waddle ownership, the Pittman ownership. I understand why those guys are ahead of him. I think they should be. If you told me that Harrison was more popular than all of them, I'd be slamming those guys into lineups. But again, from the range of outcome standpoint, like this is a perfect example of somebody that projects a couple points behind that tier, but that doesn't mean like his range of outcomes is very similar. His ceiling is just as high. He's getting half the ownership of like Pittman and Waddle. He's getting like a fifth the ownership of Myers. Trey McBride getting about half the ownership of Warren, still very, very popular at 5,800, getting about 26% ownership. So the Cardinals look pretty good here. I think that Harrison is kind of an interesting way to be contrarian, whether it's in your Cardinal stacks where people are going to heavily go probably like Murray plus McBride and then just leave the game. So double stacking maybe a little bit different, or going Murray plus Harrison maybe a little bit different, or just using Harrison as a pivot to those other mid 5K wide receivers. Tampa Bay taking on Seattle in Seattle. Rachaad White getting ownership here for the Bucs, as he should. $4,700 price tag, no Bucky Irving. The report earlier this morning was that, paraphrasing, Rachaad White is going to get the vast majority of carries. Sean Tucker does have a role, though, and they also plan on involving their third running back. That doesn't move the needle for me as far as changing what I expected to happen, which was White getting around 55% of carries, and that's total carries, not backfield carries. So it's including Baker Mayfield and wide receivers, but getting 55% of carries. Tucker probably getting like 20 to 25%. Williams maybe getting like 1 or 2. So you also expect Rachaad White to be the primary pass catcher out of the backfield. That already is sort of his role. Like Bucky Irving runs a bunch of routes too, but White is already involved as a pass catcher. Sean Tucker is not a pass catcher. So you should get plenty of pass catching opportunities for Rachaad White. He looks very good at 4,700 as another value play that certainly has upside. You're not getting too much ownership elsewhere. Godwin getting 3%, Ibuka getting 5%. When I ran stuff before the show, and this is something that I do think could change between now and lock, because it's certainly not a spot where like I'm super confident, but I was getting to this Bucs passing game, and I really don't mind it at no ownership. It's kind of like the Eagles spot. It's not appealing. You're going into Seattle, but this is a slate where you don't have those top end quarterbacks. You have Baker Mayfield, who obviously is very good. You have Godwin back at 5,900. I think Godwin's one of the more under-owned guys on the slate right now. He didn't do anything last week, and obviously there's going to be some concern about the rust factor. He's coming back from significant injuries. How good is he right now, et cetera, et cetera. He's going to get the opportunities. He ran routes on like 90% of dropbacks last week. He was not limited at all. I had bet him to go over 35.5 receiving yards. So when he didn't hit it, I assumed that he had, run all the routes, but was like just running sprints. He was targeted 10 or 11 times. He got the targets. He ran the routes. I generally don't look too much into like separation data, but in a case like this, I am interested, the people that I use fantasy points, people that were watching, like, did they think he was getting open? Was he having trouble getting open? Whatever. He graded out positively in terms of separation score in their data. So that is certainly something I like to see when I am somewhat concerned about somebody coming back from the injuries that Godwin's coming back from. So at 5,900 at low ownership, I really want to be taking some shots at Godwin here. If that brings along Baker Mayfield, fine. You can go Mayfield, White, Godwin. You can go Mayfield, Godwin, Egbuka. You can go White, Egbuka, White, Godwin, all three of them. It doesn't matter. This is another team that they have a good quarterback. They have a concentrated passing tree. Like, the only other guy that you expect to really be involved at all there is Cade Otton. And, you could pay down for him at tight end if you wanted to. Maybe, Shepard's going to be the third wide receiver. But you expect, if in the games where the Bucs go out there and score a lot of points, you expect it to be the touchdowns to be pretty concentrated to Mayfield, White, Egbuka, Godwin. So I do like Godwin in particular a lot here, just because he looked fully back last week in terms of opportunity. 6,900 Egbuka, he's run good on touchdowns so far this year, but doesn't mean that has to stop today. Individually, I mean, White, I guess, is my favorite play from the game just because obviously he projects the best. Favorite tournament play, though, would be Chris Godwin. I like the lack of ownership coming into him quite a bit. On the Seahawks side, no ownership here outside of JSN, who just continues to be underpriced at $7,100. He is very, very, very good. It's been a middle-of-the-road matchup for wide receivers so far this season in terms of schedule-adjusted fantasy points. Don't really care. Smith-Njigba gets targeted constantly on this team. He is just really good. He gets open, gets a ton of yards. We saw him really improve last year as the year went on. And then the only real question for him coming into this year was, how's the quarterback play going to be? Sam Darnold has been excellent so far. Smith-Njigba, separation score, very good so far this season as well. Again, not something that I typically care about too much, but just wanted to point it out because I had it right in front of me. Just obviously really want to get to Smith-Njigba where I can. So does the field. You're not doing anything, different or anything like that, but he is obviously a very good play. Other than that, I don't really see anything on Seattle. Cooper Kupp at 2% owned and 4,600. Certainly somebody that you can mix in maybe alongside Smith-Njigba. You get some positive correlation there where if the Seahawks are just throwing more than usual, it's good for both of them. You could play him in non-JSN lineups where maybe Kupp just has a big game and it cuts into Smith-Njigba a little bit. But obviously Smith-Njigba is going to be the big priority there. Washington taking on the Chargers in LA. Jaden Daniels is back with a knee brace, as I mentioned. Still no Terry McLaurin, no Noah Brown. John Bates is back. That doesn't really matter. He's primarily a blocking tight end. So we have Debo as the essentially wide receiver one. He is getting 14% ownership at 6,300. I think he's fine. I think that there's plenty of pivots that I can make that give me very similar outcomes to Debo. But he does look pretty good. One thing that I will mention, and I'm interested to pay attention to here, we actually weren't seeing Debo utilized as a runner in the two games that Daniels played. And then in the two games that Daniels didn't, they went to Debo more. Makes a lot of sense. Now, do they go back to not utilizing Debo as a runner now that you have Daniels back? I don't know. But that is something that, obviously if you're playing Debo, you would like him to get as many touches as he can. Daniels is the most expensive quarterback on the slate at $7K, 4% owned. I'm not really getting to him, but obviously if you want to play low on Jaden Daniels, that's never a bad idea. I think the reasons that I'm not getting to him are that he has less interesting pass catchers than some other guys. I think like Debo projects better than AJ Brown, but I like the idea of having like AJ Brown plus Devontae Smith plus Jalen Hurts more than Daniels plus Debo plus anything else from Washington. So I think that's driving it a little bit. And then also, maybe he does have a little bit less in the way of designed runs because of his knee. We don't really know. My assumption here is that Daniels is at least close to fully healthy. I don't think Washington would risk an RG3. If Daniels is like at 65%, I don't think that he's playing. But I'm still, not getting to him. I think Debo is really the only guy outside of Daniels that's particularly interesting here. Zach Ertz, if you're paying down at tight end, he should probably get the second most targets. Chris Moore should run the most routes at wide receiver. He's only 3K. What he does with those is anybody's guess. But he does have Jaden Daniels back now, so he's got a good quarterback, and he has been running the most routes. He is the most natural outside wide receiver to take those Terry McLaurin routes. And then you're getting McCaffrey and Jalen Lane rotating in the slot, or Debo's in the slot primarily. You're getting McCaffrey and Lane kind of rotating into the non-Debo slot routes, and then also some routes on the outside. They're all cheap enough where if you need a Millie Maker type dart throw, they're playable, but they're also just kind of not super useful on this slate because there is so much value. Even if you were to get like 10 fantasy points from Chris Moore at 3K, this isn't the type of slate where that probably helps you out all that much. Obviously, if you were to get like 17, that's really good, but you do still need those raw points, especially on a slate like this. In chat, Jeffrey said, am I on an island by myself thinking JSN is overrated and not playing him today? Yeah, you're probably on an island thinking that JSN is overrated. He's very obviously one of the best wide receivers in the NFL and gets targeted nonstop. The only like negative for JSN is that the Seahawks have been a very run-heavy team, but they've also been involved in blowouts this year, so they haven't thrown as much as they will in some other games. But yeah, JSN is absolutely fantastic. On the Charger side, Justin Herbert, going to be one of the top 4 owned quarterbacks. Again, probably in that group with Kyler and Daniel Jones. 6,100, nice spot against Washington. Their defense doesn't do a whole lot of stopping anybody. They have actually been pretty good against the run overall this year, but it's mostly been limiting running backs in the passing game. They've been somewhat above average in the running game as well. But if you are a tight end, wide receiver, or whatever, you've had your way against Washington so far this season. No real reason to think that that is changing anytime soon. Justin Herbert, 6,100, gives you some rushing upside, gives you a lot of passing upside. He's going to look good. It's just, the ownership game, especially because everybody that you're playing him with, or most of the guys that you're playing him with, are also going to be pretty popular as well. Hampton getting 22% ownership at 6,500. I think he looks good. Clear workhorse here with no Najee Harris. He is a little bit cheaper than those other guys at the top that you're getting to. As I mentioned, Washington has been better against the run than against the pass, but you're still just getting all of the opportunities for Hampton, and he will catch passes as well. In the passing game, Quentin Johnston's been the guy so far this year. He is getting targeted. He's catching passes. He's making big plays. He has looked legitimately good. He's looked like the player that people thought he could be the entire time he's been in the league, when he's been relatively disappointing. So on the one hand, it feels really scary and gross to project him ahead of Keenan Allen and Ladd McConkey. But at the same time, you kind of can't not do it. Like, he is getting targeted more often on a per route basis than McConkey. He's running routes 90+% of the time, whereas Keenan Allen is running like 75 to 80% as the slot guy, at least, a decent chunk of the time. So Johnston projects as the number 1 wide receiver here. I do think that McConkey and Allen look good as well. I think the ownership is kind of like beat us to the punch, though. I don't think Allen and McConkey look as good as guys like Waddle or now, granted, Myers has a lot more ownership, but Myers, I don't. It kind of just feels like the ownership is like ahead of, even though they haven't been great, especially McConkey. It's like everybody's aware that this is a very good spot against Washington, so they're going to be popular. And that doesn't mean, obviously, that this isn't going to be the breakout game. But when you do have actual question marks, like, is Ladd McConkey going to start earning targets at some point? I am okay with just kind of going to some other spots and hoping I don't get completely killed. And the thing also, I think, that drives that here is Washington being bad against everybody that runs routes. It's not Washington shuts down the outside guys and then they just get hammered over the slot or over the middle. They get hammered over the middle, but they get hammered on the outside as well. Everybody's going to be open for Justin Herbert. So, yeah, that could just be McConkey has a big game. Absolutely. But it's not like you're getting any sort of like funnel to McConkey. It's just funnel to everybody on the Chargers scores fantasy points because the Commanders' defense sucks, at least, in the passing game. So I think it's a very good spot for the Chargers. I am a little bit, I'm getting, at least right now, more Johnston than I am Allen and McConkey, because I do think he looks better and ownership is similar, pricing is similar. So I'm just going to take more of him. But clearly Allen and McConkey are in good spots here as well. Final game on the slate, Detroit taking on Cincinnati. I tweeted it. I was disappointed. I saw Pete Overzet tweet a clip of his show where he had JM to win and Yuta on, and they were talking about Lions onslaughts. And I think that it's a really interesting spot. And I hadn't watched any content this week, so I was disappointed that other people were talking about it. This is a very, very good spot for the Lions against the Bengals. The Bengals defense is atrocious. They suck at everything. They can't get off the field. They give up a ton of plays to opponents. Their offense with Browning can't sustain drives, so they give the ball right back to opponents. And the Lions are like the perfect onslaught team because we've seen it a bunch. Dan Campbell doesn't take his foot off the gas. This isn't a team that gets up 28-0 in the first half and then just runs out the clock in the second half. They just keep doing what they do. The only negative for the Lions is that they have so many different guys that can get it done. You know, you have Gibbs, you have St. Brown, you have Williams, you have Laporta, all as guys that are very involved in the passing game. Gibbs, obviously, in the running game as well. You have David Montgomery, who is not getting a ton of opportunities, but are 2 weeks removed from the 12 carry, like 120-yard touchdown game for Montgomery. You have the friends and family narrative that I've seen mentioned for Montgomery, which isn't something that is going to really play a role in what I'm doing, but it is something that you can't say for sure isn't a factor. Like, is he going to get more goal line carries because his family's there? Like, who knows? It's basically the way I'm thinking about that is in DFS, so much stuff would have to go right. Like, you not only have to get the narrative actually taking effect where the Lions give Montgomery a bunch more work than usual, but then you still need all these other running backs on the slate to not beat Montgomery. So to me, if you're somebody that buys into that narrative and you're somewhere that you can make bets, I would just like bet ladders on whatever, looks the best, or, 2+ touchdowns or something like that. Because at least then, if the narrative hits, you win. Whereas in DFS, like you're taking this big risk on the narrative, and the percentage of the time that actually hits, there's a large percentage where you're still just getting beat because XYZ running back did well and Montgomery still didn't matter. So I would, if you are somebody buying into that, which I don't think is crazy, like in the spectrum of narratives that people buy into, this is one where it's at least reasonable. I'd probably look to like just ladder stuff if you can, more so than anything too crazy in DFS. But again, a situation where if you're using Run the Sims, you can feel free to make your adjustments to how much work you think David Montgomery is getting. But anyway, back to the point. We know this is an offense that has a bunch of big playmakers. They're going to run a lot of plays, most likely. They're not going to take their foot off the gas. You can obviously single stack, double stack them, but you can go three, you can stack three. You can really just do whatever you want, getting Lions into your lineups. The only thing that I think is a negative here is that this game is not in the dome. It is outdoors. That's all I have as far as like things not to love about the Lions. There's going to be a lot of ownership coming into Gibbs. There's going to be a good amount coming into $7,900 St. Brown, but there's not going to be much to Laporta, who I love as a tight end. There's not going to be a lot to Jameson Williams. There's not going to be much to Montgomery. There's not going to be much to Goff. So, you can get to this team in contrarian ways. You can get to the popular guys too, but they look really, really, really good. I expect to be getting to quite a bit of the Lions. I do not expect to be getting to quite a bit of the Bengals. Somewhat of an exception for Jamar Chase, just because he is $7,800 Jamar Chase. He does positively correlate with those Lions teams. Now, again, reminder, you do not need a Bengals run back just because you have a bunch of Lions, because they probably will not take their foot off the gas regardless of what the score is. You can play your Lions onslaught and then whatever other guys you want to play. You don't need to like force in Jamar Chase or T. Higgins. Now, if Jamar Chase has a monster game, that certainly increases the chances of the Lions continuing to really keep their foot on the gas. Same for Higgins. So like there is still some appeal there, but certainly would not be setting any sort of like, I have to have a Bengal if I'm going to play the Lions type stuff. But Jamar Chase, clearly the first guy I'd want to get to here. Higgins would be second. I don't really think that there is a third. Now we'll take a look at the lineups I built, the player exposures that I was getting to. If you have any questions, again, feel free to throw them in chat. Starting at quarterback, getting to getting to Jared Goff the most, followed by Mayfield, who I had talked about. He's one also, I forgot to mention this before. When I ran the Sims before the show, I believe the ownership projection I had on Mayfield was literally sub 1%. I do recommend just using like a floor of 1 or 1.5% or something, because when you're talking 1, 2, 3% ownership, things are going to be very, very, very sensitive. So that is a spot where like, if I make that 1 or 2%, I'm probably still over the field on Mayfield, but it's probably not my second highest owned quarterback. Stroud, talked about all the volatility in that game that I like. I like the price tag as well. Justin Fields, Like, yeah, it sucks he's popular, but he's also very clearly underpriced and in a great spot. I am getting below the field on the other popular quarterbacks, though. Herbert, Jones, Murray, at least right now. Again, I think they're all good plays. I think they're in good spots, but it's just when you kind of put everything together, I think that, some other quarterbacks that aren't getting much ownership look close enough, and so do their pass catchers, whether that's Jalen Hurts, Stroud, getting to a little bit of Darnold, getting to a little bit of Bo Nix, whoever it may be. Like, I think the ownership on these quarterbacks outside of Fields really is a little higher than it should be. And so I'm just getting to some other stacks, but I do agree that like these are the best 4 quarterbacks on the slate. At running back, getting to a ton of Achane, getting to Taylor, Gibbs, Hall, White, all 20+%, getting 10 to 20% on Hampton, Williams, Henry, which does put me over the field on him, Scattaboo. Where is Rico Dowdle? Oh, 19%. Okay. Yeah, so like running back, I'm not really doing anything too crazy. I'm pretty much playing the running backs that everybody else thinks are good plays too. I am, again, a little over the field on Henry. I'm in line with my ownership projection on Barkley. I'm in line with it on Genty, but pretty much playing. And again, this goes to the quarterback thing too. If I'm playing more Derrick Henry, or I'm playing more Ashton Genty, or I'm playing more Woody Marks, all very reasonable things to do, then I can play more. I'm likely also playing more Justin Herbert, Daniel Jones, etc. Everything works hand in hand. What does Shady EXP mean? So at Run the Sims, we have an add-on package where you can use Shady Advice's, if you don't know who that is, one of the best DFS players right now. You can use his proprietary code to diversify the set of lineups that you're playing. And so what it does is it runs the simulations, sends all the results of those simulations to his code, and then it kicks you back the set of lineups that does the best to minimize your risk while maximizing reward, balances that as well as it can. So that is what that is. So yeah, running back, pretty straightforward for me. Wide receiver, I am below the field on Smith and Jigba, so there's one for the guy in chat. Again, not because of anything having to do with Smith and Jigba, just because I have him projected for 30% ownership, and there's a lot of good wide receiver plays. I'm getting a lot of Garrett Wilson. He's only 6,100. Over the field, I like 2x on St. Brown. Again, just really liking the Lions. Around half the field or a third of the field on Myers. Still getting to him, just not as much as the field. Over the field on Nico, which makes sense given my CJ Stroud. Over the field by a little bit on Waddle. Around the field on Johnston. I actually thought I was getting a little bit more, but still more of him than the other guys. Nice stand on Godwin. I like that a lot. Stand on Egbuka. I like less, but it's whatever. A little bit of a stand on AJ Brown. I like. So definitely some interesting ones here. Only getting 6% McMillan right now. Wouldn't mind getting more. I do have the Dolphins. Jameson Williams, I like that one. Again, if you're going to the Lions, obviously you want St. Brown, you want Gibbs, but mixing in Laporta, mixing in Williams, I like that a lot as well. At tight end, Tyler Warren, again, I'm getting 19%. That's pretty much in line with his optimal rate. He's likely to be 30, 40%, I think, at least in what I had run before the show. And so I'm getting him at a high rate, just not that high of a rate. I'm taking a big stand right now on Laporta. If people aren't going to play him and they're just going to jam in Warren, Ferguson, McBride, I'll take my shots at Laporta. I can still get to some Warren, McBride, and Ferguson without a problem. Dalton Schultz as a punt tight end in my probably mostly in Schaub stacks works, and then kind of just spreading things out here. And then at DST, pretty flat as usual. Texans against Cooper Rush at 2,400. Certainly no issues there. Punting with the Saints. There's not really defenses that like stand out as great on this slate, I don't think. So just going cheap and preferably relatively low owned is a pretty good way to go as well. Nick said, is it crazy to fade all the cheap running back value in 1 to 3 entries? No. You can certainly make good lineups doing it. Like, obviously it's risky because if those guys have actual big games, you are in a lot of trouble, but you can make very good lineups that have, the mid-range and upper range running backs, save some money at tight end or save some money at quarterback, go to that like 5 to 6K wide receiver range. You can make good lineups doing that if you want to. There's nothing wrong with that. Do I have a favorite DST? No, like I pretty much never do. Whatever is cheap and or low owned is pretty much always going to be my favorite defense. Looking to avoid ownership there generally. But that's all I have for this one. Thank you for checking out the show. Good luck on your lineups this week, and I will see you back here next week.